She was a Gentile, and he gave her the response she deserved. He answered her not a word. Yeah, she had to overcome racism. For when the disciples, check this out, when the disciples see her and hear this Gentile calling out to their Messiah, they react by telling Jesus to send her away. They wanted nothing to do with her. She was not one of their people. In their eyes, she was different, and that was enough to justify them not caring about her at all. Disciples were acting like they were from the Tea Party or something. Yeah, y'all ain't gonna help me preach in here now. She had to overcome rejection. For as Jesus speaks to this woman in verse 23 to 26, his words appear harsh to our ears. His words must have shaken her to the very core of her being. His words probably broke her heart. First, he simply ignores her. It's as if he turns an indifferent ear to her cry for help. Then he tells her that his whole purpose in coming to the world was to reach the lost sheep of Israel. You are not of the right stock, not from the right tribe, not of the right race. When she persists, Jesus tells her, check this out, that she's a dog and does not deserve the children's bread. The disciples rejected her, and now it appears that Jesus is rejecting her too. Then she had to overcome the reality. The realities of this situation are harsh. Her daughter was possessed by a devil. She was a member of a doomed race. These religious men did not seem to care about her or about her situation. It must have appeared to her that her situation was hopeless. But I've got to give her credit because she's a Gentile out of Gentile territory who comes calling on Jesus by his messianic Jewish name. And what that tells me is that she knew how to think for herself. She calls Jesus, watch this, what the Jews would not call him. Oh, I'm going to let that one marinate just for a moment. She calls Jesus what the Jews would not call him, and calls on him as Gentiles thought they could not. So to anybody that was sitting there listening to her on either side, they would have told her to shut up or thought that she was crazy. Because Jews don't think that he's the Messiah in the first place. Come on, y'all. And Gentiles are too dirty to call him who he is, and yet she goes against both mentalities and does what neither side would do. And that's why the disciples who saw her in verse 23 says to Jesus, send her away, shut her up, for she's crying after us. But what you need to know is that when you need a miracle, you've got to be able to think for yourself. Oh yeah, you got to be able to think for yourself. When you learn to think for yourself, it will cause you to separate yourself from other people who can't see or are not bold enough to go after it for themselves. Got to stop hanging with people who don't have vision. Helen Keller was blind and deaf, was asked the question in an interview, what's worse than being blind? Said worse than being blind is people who can see but have no vision. Some folk who have their physical sight have no vision. Got to get away from folk who aren't bold enough to go after it. The Jews didn't believe it. The Gentiles thought that they couldn't have it. But she said, forget the religious barriers. Forget the racial hindrance. Forget the political restraint. Jesus is in my vicinity, and if I need a miracle, I'm going to do and say what none within my surroundings are bold enough to do. Sometimes you got to go against the grain and do what folk are not bold enough to do. I'm going to call him who he is. Don't let yourself be defined by the world's construction, but be liberated by the Lord's possibilities. Sometimes to get away from the negative thoughts around you, the thoughts of negativity, to get away from the jealousy, what you can't do, what you can't have, you need a transcendent breakthrough. You need a metanoia of consciousness, a conversion of mind, a deconstruction of mentality, so that you begin to see, in spite of human definition, in spite of limitation, in spite of the condition, in spite of the scientific hypothesis and the philosophical construction, that with God all things are possible. The whole house should have went up right there. I just told somebody that all things are possible. With God, everything you're going through is possible. Every problem that you have can be solved. Every disease that you have can be cured. I said all things. Oh, maybe I'm just preaching to myself, but I feel like shouting right there just to know that I serve a God that with him all things are possible. The songwriter said, I came to Jesus just as I was, weary, worn, and sad, but I found in him a resting place, and he's made me glad. Now here's what tripped me out in the text. Watch this now. They said, Jesus, hush her up because she's crying after us. So I gathered, Deacon Thomas, in my own recollection that perhaps something went on in the commercial break that Matthew or Mark didn't jot down in the text. Because when I read the text, I see nowhere in the text where she called out to any of them. Maybe y'all missed that. I thought she said, Jesus, son of David. I didn't hear her say Peter, James, come on somebody, Thomas. I didn't hear her call out to any of the disciples. And so I can just imagine in my own sanctified imagination that she's wondering within herself, what makes you think you can shut me up when I wasn't even talking to you in the first place? Oh, y'all ain't gonna help me preach in here now. How tragic and what a shame it is when we allow people to infiltrate our connection with God by causing us to stop rendering that which has only been intended and reserved for God alone. He alone is worthy of your honor. He alone is worthy of your praise. He alone is worthy of your worship. He alone is worthy of your obedience. Not him and what they think. Not him and other people's opinion. Not him plus how you think I'm going to look. Not him plus what your enemies say. You weren't talking to them in the first place. Listen, brothers and sisters, if they can't heal us, if they can't dry our tears, we ain't talking to them. And if we're not talking to them, we should not allow them to inhibit our connection with the one who changed our life. His name is Jesus. So if your name ain't Jesus, this is an A and B conversation, and you can see your way out of it. I'm calling on Jesus. And this woman shows us something. She refuses to let anybody or anything inhibit her faith. Just because things don't look to be going her way, she doesn't walk away. And I saw something that I hadn't seen before in this text. And that is that he doesn't say no, he says nothing. Oh, yeah. See, brothers and sisters, silence doesn't mean no. Saying nothing is not necessarily the same as saying no. When Jesus says nothing, it always means that he's up to something. There's somebody in here and you've been fasting and you've been praying and you've been sowing and it appears as if God has not responded. But here's what you need to know, beloved. Just because he hasn't answered doesn't mean he's saying no. If he hasn't answered, it might mean he's up to something. He just might be testing your faith to see how willing you are to put your tenacity and your trust in him. When you can't see your way, are you going to trust him? Are you going to trust his will when it doesn't make sense?